let's settle in for a quiet story tonight. Before we start, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? I always love knowing that part. Let your breathing slow. Let your hands rest loosely. Let your mind wander softly, without pressure, without expectation. The night is long and you have time. This is a story about truth. The kind of truth that doesn't arrive loudly. The kind that slips through cracks, that whispers in the dark, that speaks before the heart is ready to listen. And it begins with a man named Elias. Elias had always been a peaceful sleeper. His wife, Maren, used to tease him about it, saying he could sleep through thunderstorms, earthquakes, and a marching band if it ever came to that. He rarely moved at night, barely shifted, hardly ever made a sound. He simply drifted off, breathed steadily, and returned in the morning as if he had been carved from stillness. For years, Maren found that calming. Elias was the one constant in her world, a quiet presence, a steady pulse, a man who didn't raise his voice, didn't complicate things, didn't break whatever he touched. But one night, something changed. It wasn't dramatic, not a jolt, not a cry, not a nightmare, just a shift. Something small and delicate, like the first crack in thin ice. Maren noticed because she happened to be awake, lying on her back, staring at the ceiling, unable to fall asleep. Elias twitched. Just once. A light, almost imperceptible movement in his hand. She turned her head slightly to look at him, expecting him to settle, but instead his breathing changed. He exhaled a bit too sharply. His eyebrows tightened. His jaw moved in a way she hadn't seen before. At first she thought he might be having a bad dream, but then came the whisper. Soft, barely audible. A small release of sound that didn't belong to the silence. He said a name. A man's name. Not hers. Not anyone she knew he was connected to. A name that seemed to come from somewhere deeply buried. Maren froze. She listened again, waiting, hoping she misheard. And then it came. The sentence that changed everything. I should have told her sooner. Her heart stopped for a moment, because she knew, immediately, even without clarity, even without context. He was touching a truth she had buried so deeply inside herself that she sometimes forgot how alive it still was. 6 years ago, one terrible decision. A night blurred by alcohol, weakness, and loneliness. One mistake with someone she trusted too much. One moment she wished she could erase. She had never told Elias. She had never planned to. She believed the best way to protect him was to pretend it had never happened. But guilt has a way of surviving even the hardest attempts to drown it. She lay awake the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling, her chest tight, her breath shallow. She waited for more whispers, but Elias settled back into silence. Peaceful silence, oblivious silence. The next morning, he woke with his usual half-asleep smile, stretching and rubbing his eyes before leaning over to kiss her forehead. He walked into the kitchen, humming softly, ready to start the day. He didn't know. He didn't remember. He didn't suspect. And that terrified her more than if he had looked her in the eyes and accused her directly. Silence carries weight, and this silence pressed against her ribs like a stone. The next night, she couldn't sleep. She lay perfectly still, eyes half open, waiting again. The house felt too quiet, too aware, as if the walls themselves knew what was happening. Sometime after 3, his breathing shifted again. His fingers curled slightly, his head turned toward her. He whispered. This time, his words were clear enough to punch the air out of her lungs. I don't know if he's mine. Her entire body tightened. Her hands trembled beneath the covers. Her heartbeat hammered so loudly that she thought it might wake him. He didn't know the truth consciously, but something deep inside him did. The truth was finding its own way out. She pressed her hands against her face and tried not to cry. Elias slept on, unaware of the effect his unconscious words were having. She listened to him breathe, listened to the gentle rhythm of his chest rising and falling, and wondered how much longer her secret could survive. Morning came again, and with it, his normal calm. He made coffee, he prepared breakfast. He laughed lightly when she bumped into him in the kitchen. But beneath all of it, something subtle had changed. His eyes lingered on the boy for a moment too long. His pauses lasted a fraction longer than usual, and he looked at Maren in a way he hadn't before. Soft, but searching. The tiniest seed of doubt had entered his mind, planted by a subconscious that wasn't willing to keep the truth buried anymore. Over the next several nights, the whispers continued. I need answers. I can't keep pretending. I have to know. Each sentence chipped away at the walls Maren had built. She felt herself unraveling slowly, quietly, painfully. She wondered if she should confess before he found out. She wondered if he would forgive her. She wondered if time, apologies, or explanations could save them. But guilt is not something you control. It chooses its own timing, its own escape route, its own sharp edges. And Elias's subconscious had already chosen for both of them. He didn't confront her directly. He didn't accuse her. He didn't question her behavior or ask why she seemed distant. Instead, he did something far more devastating. He visited her sister. It was supposed to be a simple visit, just to check on his sister-in-law after the birth of her first child. He brought their son with him. The child, he believed, was his. But when her sister saw the boy in his arms, something inside her cracked open. She couldn't hide it. She couldn't lie. She couldn't keep the secret anymore. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she even had control of them. In one trembling, guilt-ridden confession, she told Elias the truth. Maren had told her the night after it happened. She had been drunk, terrified, ashamed. She had sobbed into her sister's arms and begged her to never say a word. Her sister tried to keep that promise. But guilt, like truth, wears down even the strongest resolve. When Elias walked in, holding a child who might not be his, something inside her couldn't hold the weight anymore. I'm so sorry. She told me 6 years ago. She slept with him. She wasn't sure who the father was. Elias didn't interrupt. He didn't ask questions. He didn't react at all. He simply nodded once, looked down at the boy, and whispered, "Thank you." Then he walked out. He drove to a clinic without calling Maren, without hesitation, without fear. He needed the truth. Not for revenge, not for anger, but because something inside him was done living in uncertainty. The week that followed moved in slow, heavy hours. He went to work, he ate dinner, he tucked the child into bed. But he didn't smile, he didn't laugh, he didn't hum while making coffee. He was a man waiting to have his world redefined. When the results finally arrived, he sat at the kitchen table alone. He didn't breathe for a moment. He didn't blink. He just held the envelope in his trembling hands. Opening it felt like opening a scar. Reading it felt like stepping into cold water. The boy was not his. Not biologically, not genetically. The truth that had whispered in the night was now carved in ink. Elias felt something inside him shift. Not violently, not loudly, just a quiet rearranging of everything he thought he knew. He still loved the child. Of course he did. But love built on deception becomes a different kind of love, one that floats, unanchored, in a space between hope and grief. He sat there for a long time, unable to move. When night came and the boy finally fell asleep, Elias asked Maren to sit with him. She knew instantly. He placed the paper on the table. Her world collapsed in front of him. The moment Maren saw the paper on the table, her breath left her body in one painful rush. She stared at the document, as if staring long enough might change what was written. That maybe if she blinked softly, fate would rewrite itself. But nothing moved. Nothing softened. Nothing shifted in her favor. Elias sat quietly, his hands resting loosely in his lap. For a long, hollow moment, neither of them spoke. The house felt suspended in time, held in a thin thread of silence that neither dared to break. Finally, Maren tried. Her voice was thin when it came out. "Elias, please." He didn't raise his eyes. "How long were you going to let me believe he was mine?" She swallowed hard. "I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I was stupid. I made a mistake, but I swear to you, I've been faithful to you ever since." He nodded slightly, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement that she had spoken words he couldn't absorb. "It's been 6 years. I know," she whispered. "I know, and I'm so sorry." He looked up then, slowly, eyes heavy with something deeper than anger, disappointment, betrayal, grief, the quiet kind that doesn't scream but sinks. "Maren, I loved you. I loved him. I built my life around you both, and you let me." Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want to hurt you." "But you did," he said softly. "You already did, years ago. And I didn't even know it. I've been loving a life that wasn't real." She tried to reach for his hand, but he pulled his away gently. Not harshly, not dramatically, just enough to show that something inside him had shut off. He stood. She followed. He said the words he could not take back. "I want a divorce." Her knees buckled. She cried into her palms, chest heaving, breath stumbling out in broken gasps. But Elias stood still, quiet, solid. A man who had reached the end of a long, painful rope. When she finally threatened to take full custody, a panic move, born of desperation, not strategy, that was the moment he broke enough to raise his voice for the first time in their entire marriage. "Take your child and go." It wasn't rage. It wasn't cruelty. It was the sound of a soul collapsing. And she went, crying, shaking, carrying the little boy who was already half asleep, unaware that his world had shifted forever. Elias watched the door close behind them, and the silence that followed was unlike any he had ever known. The first night alone was strange. He didn't sleep, not really. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from the past 6 years. Birthdays, shared meals, little laughs, tiny gestures, bedtime routines. He remembered the first time he held the boy, the weight of him, the warmth, the joy. And then he remembered the look on his sister-in-law's face when she confessed, the shaking voice, the quiet guilt. Everything felt like a mosaic that had been shattered and scattered across the floor, and he didn't know which pieces to pick up first. He rose before sunrise and walked to the kitchen barefoot, touching the countertop lightly, as if grounding himself through the cool surface. The house felt unfamiliar without Maren's footsteps, without the boy's little sounds in the morning. He made coffee. He didn't drink it. He sat at the table where he had opened the paternity test and stared at the empty space before him. His parents came by mid-morning. His father placed a hand on his shoulder. His mother hugged him and cried softly into his shirt. They sat with him for a while, talking about practical things, the divorce process, the legal steps, the home that was in his name. But Elias barely spoke. He nodded. He listened. When they left, the silence returned like a tide rolling in across the floor. He went to sit on the couch and instinctively reached for the remote, expecting to hear the familiar sound of cartoons playing on low volume. But there was nothing. Just silence. He placed the remote down. The days that followed were long and blurred around the edges. He went to work, came home, heated up dinner he barely tasted, sat on the couch, stared at nothing, went to bed, lay awake, drifted into broken pieces of sleep, dreamed of voices, of whispers, of nights when his subconscious had tried to warn him that something was wrong. His therapist told him grief is a slow visitor. It does not leave because someone says, "You're better now." It hangs around, lingering in corners, waiting for moments when the world is quiet enough to be heard. So Elias listened. He sat in his empty bedroom on the fourth night alone and allowed himself to feel the weight in his chest, the heaviness behind his ribs, the ache in his bones. He whispered aloud, not to anyone in particular, "Why wasn't I enough?" It wasn't a question born from jealousy or insecurity. It came from a place of genuine heartbreak, the kind of heartbreak that forms when you realize the life you cherished was never fully yours. He didn't cry. He rarely cried. But that night, the tears finally came. Quietly, slowly. He bent forward and placed his face in his hands, letting the grief drip through his fingers. The house was silent except for the sound of his breathing. Unsteady, wounded, human. He didn't blame the child. He couldn't. Children are innocent. But he couldn't face him either. Not yet. Maybe not ever. His therapist told him something interesting in their next session. When a truth arrives in the subconscious before it arrives consciously, your mind is telling you that the pain has been living inside you longer than you realized. Elias hadn't expected that. "You've been sensing something for years," she continued. "Small things, minor inconsistencies, emotional distance, a strange feeling you couldn't name. You didn't know the truth consciously, but it lived in you. That's why your sleep spoke before you did." The idea unsettled him, that his dreams had known, that his subconscious had tried to help him, that the whispers were not random but the voice of intuition pushing upward through layers of denial. He asked her, very quietly, "Does that make me weak?" She shook her head. "No, it makes you human." He thought about that for a long time. 2 weeks after Marin left, he found the boy's favorite stuffed animal wedged between the couch cushions. A small floppy dog with worn stitches and one eye slightly loose. He picked it up, held it in his hands, and felt the weight of love that had nowhere left to go. He sat on the couch with it, thumb brushing the soft fabric, breathing slowly. The child wasn't his, but Elias had loved him as if he were. That love didn't evaporate simply because a piece of paper said it should, but love can be redirected. Love can transform. Love can become memory rather than responsibility. He placed the toy gently on a shelf, unsure whether he was putting it away or preserving it. Later that night, he couldn't sleep again. The silence felt too sharp, too empty. He walked through the house, the living room, the hallway, the bedroom, touching surfaces with his fingertips as if confirming that the world around him was still real. He ended up sitting on the floor in the child's empty bedroom. The walls still had the little star stickers Maren had put up when the boy was 3. The small bookshelf still held the picture books he used to read aloud in soft, calming tones. He rested his back against the wall and breathed. The room smelled faintly of laundry detergent and old crayons. It felt like a ghost of a life that had vanished overnight. He whispered to the empty room, "I hope he grows up happy." He didn't hate the boy, but he had to let him go. Letting go is an act of love too, though a painful one. The divorce process began quietly, without dramatic arguments or courtroom tension. Both lawyers recommended keeping communication minimal, given the emotional impact. Maren was living with her parents in a small, quiet house across town. She didn't call, she didn't text, she didn't ask about him. She tried once, sending a message saying only, "Can we talk?" Elias stared at his phone for almost an hour before finally responding, "I'm not ready." She didn't push. Maybe she understood that every word spoken too soon carried the risk of reopening wounds not yet healing. Instead, things moved slowly. Paperwork, signatures, discussions with lawyers, therapy sessions. His therapist asked him a question one afternoon. "Do you regret loving them?" He thought about it, about Maren's laugh, about the boy's tiny fingers wrapping around his, about nights spent talking softly in bed, about family dinners, about the gentle rhythm they once had. "No," he said softly, "I don't regret loving them. I regret not knowing the truth." The therapist nodded. "Then you haven't lost everything. You still have your ability to love. That's something not everyone comes out with." He hadn't considered that. One quiet Saturday morning, he found himself sitting at the dining table, sunlight drifting through the window, dust particles moving like slow snowflakes in the warm light. He made coffee. He actually drank it this time. As he sat with the warm mug between his hands, he realized something. He wasn't angry anymore, not the way he had been. The anger had been replaced by exhaustion. Then the exhaustion had softened into sadness, and now the sadness was turning into acceptance. Acceptance is not forgiveness. Acceptance is not forgetting. Acceptance is simply acknowledging reality without demanding it to be different. He said out loud to the empty room, "It happened. It hurt. And now it's over." Saying it didn't heal him instantly, but it steadied him. He carried his coffee to the living room, sat down on the couch, and opened a notebook his brother had given him. He wrote slowly at first, shaky, uneven words, but soon sentences flowed out of him. He wrote about the nights he whispered truth in his sleep. He wrote about the fear before the test results came. He wrote about the moment he realized the child wasn't his. He wrote about Maren's tears. He wrote about the silence that followed. By the time he closed the notebook, he had filled 10 pages. It was the first moment he felt a small amount of relief. One evening, several weeks after the separation, he returned home late from work. He stepped into the quiet house and slipped off his shoes. The air smelled like clean laundry, and something faintly floral from a candle he'd left burning earlier. He went upstairs, brushed his teeth, and climbed into bed. For once, he didn't dread sleep. He was tired enough that his body welcomed the stillness. But when sleep came, it brought a strange calm. He dreamed of standing on a shoreline at dusk, watching waves roll in and out. Each wave seemed to carry fragments of memory: laughter, birthdays, bedtime stories, quiet dinners. He stood barefoot in the cool sand, letting the water wash over his toes. In the dream, Maren appeared at a distance, holding the boy's hand. She didn't come closer. She didn't speak. She just looked at him with soft, sad eyes. The boy waved. Elias waved back, and then the dream faded. When he woke the next morning, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Lightness. Not happiness, not joy, but a quiet, gentle lightness, like the breath after crying, like the calm after a storm. He sat up slowly, ran a hand through his hair, and let out a long, deep exhale. He whispered, "I'm going to be okay." For the first time, he believed it. Months passed. Life settled into new rhythms. Therapy helped, routine helped, writing helped, the silence helped. He learned to cook meals for one. He learned to enjoy solitary evenings without feeling lonely. He learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but about not letting the past dictate his future. He began jogging in the mornings. He redecorated parts of the house, not to erase memories, but to create space for new ones. He started volunteering at a local community garden, tending the soil, planting seeds, watching life grow quietly and patiently. He found peace in the slow things. Every now and then he thought about the boy. He wondered how he was, if he was growing strong, if he was laughing, if he was loved. He hoped so. He wished nothing bad for Maren either, not any more. He didn't want her back. He didn't want the past rewritten. But he wanted her to heal too. In her own way, in her own time. Because broken people aren't enemies. They're just people who hurt others while hurting themselves. On a cool autumn evening, Elias stepped outside to sit on the porch, wrapped in a soft blanket, holding a warm mug of tea. The air smelled like wet earth and fallen leaves. The sky was dim, transitioning from orange to blue to deep, quiet black. He looked up at the stars, tiny and distant and steady. For the first time in a long time, he felt aligned with himself. He whispered into the night, "Thank you for the truth." Not because he enjoyed the pain. Not because the truth was gentle, but because it freed him. Truth breaks before it heals, but it always, always leads to clarity. He stayed outside until the air grew cold enough that his breath came out in white clouds. Then he went inside, closed the door, and felt a deep sense of finality wash over him. Not sadness, not regret, just closure. The kind of closure that arrives quietly, like a soft whisper at the end of a long night. And somewhere, in another house across town, Maren sat beside her sleeping child, her fingers brushing through his hair, tears slipping down her cheeks. She wasn't crying for Elias anymore. She was crying for the version of herself who had made the mistake, and for the years of consequences that followed. She whispered into the darkness, "I hope he heals." And she meant it, because sometimes love doesn't survive as a relationship. Sometimes it survives as a wish. Back in his quiet home, Elias turned off the lights, lay down in bed, and closed his eyes. The night didn't whisper anymore. His dreams didn't claw at him. His subconscious didn't bleed secrets. There was only stillness, soft, warm, peaceful stillness. The kind that follows truth, the kind that comes after storms, the kind that tells you, gently, you made it. He breathed slowly, deeply, calmly, and for the first time in months, he drifted into sleep without fear, a quiet sleep, a gentle sleep, a sleep where nothing whispered from the shadows, because the truth had already spoken, and his heart had finally listened.